The moment you can make a copy of yourself might be closer than anyone expected, at least if you believe Elon Musk. Because at Tesla's 2025 shareholder meeting, Musk floated a jaw-dropping idea that, within about 20 years, a mind copy could potentially live inside a Tesla Optimus robot, using Neuralink as the bridge between brain and machine. And the internet did what it always does with a sentence like that. It panicked, memmed it, argued over it, and turned it into a headline that felt like science fiction breaking into real life. E-week, +2+2, but here's the twist nobody wants to admit. That robot afterlife line might not even be the most important part of Tesla's plan, because while everyone stares at the dream of digital immortality, Tesla is quietly pushing Optimus toward something way more ordinary and way more disruptive. Not war zones, not backflips, not flashy robot stunts, your kitchen, your laundry, your living room floor, and once you see why, you start to understand what Tesla is really building and why some people are excited, while others are honestly terrified. But that wasn't the whole story. At the same meeting era, Musk also leaned into a different claim, one that sounds almost as outrageous, but has a totally different kind of danger behind it. He's repeatedly suggested Optimus could become the biggest product of all time, even bigger than smartphones. That's not a casual statement. That's we're not building a prototype, we're building a planet-scale product statement. NASDAQ +2, Yahoo Finance +2, and that one sentence changes everything. Because if you're aiming to be bigger than phones, you're not aiming for a few factories. You're aiming for households. You're aiming for mass adoption. You're aiming for something people can't imagine living without. And suddenly, the why chores questions stop sounding random. It starts sounding like the plan. Now think about how new technology usually wins. It doesn't win by being impressive. It wins by being useful in a way you feel every day. Phones didn't take over because they were shiny. They took over because they replaced 10 tools at once and lived in your pocket. A humanoid robot doesn't get accepted into homes because it can dance. It gets accepted because it handles the stuff people hate doing. The stuff that quietly steals time, energy, and peace. Dishes, clutter, laundry, basic organizing, fetching items, cleaning up the same mess for the 400th time. That's the gateway. Because once a robot proves it can handle your normal life without breaking anything, scaring anyone, or getting in the way. The we live with robots now barrier snaps. And that's why the domestic angle matters more than people realize. Factories are structured, repetitive, controlled. They're hard, sure, but they're predictable compared to a home. Homes are chaos. Every home is different. Every family is different. Furniture moves. Objects disappear. Pets get underfoot. Kids do unpredictable kid things. And humans leave half-finished tasks everywhere, like breadcrumbs. A robot that can survive that is a different kind of machine. So if Tesla is serious about making Optimus a global consumer product, the home is not a side quest, it's the final boss. And what happens next is where most humanoid robots quietly collapse, because the real nightmare in robotics isn't legs, it's hands. If you've ever watched humanoid robot videos, you've seen the pattern. Amazing movement, smooth walking, even balancing tricks. Then you watch them try to do something normal like pick up a delicate object and suddenly the illusion breaks. That's because useful in a home is mostly a hand problem. A hand has to grip a glass without crushing it, hold a slippery plate without dropping it, pull a thin trash bag without tearing it, fold fabric that fights back, open a stuck jar, move clutter without making the mess worse. That kind of work demands fine control, not just strength. And that's why Optimus hand upgrades have been such a big deal in coverage and discussion. Reports and breakdowns have pointed to Optimus moving toward much higher dexterity, often described around 22 degrees of freedom in the hand, which is basically a way of saying more independent motion, more control, more human-like manipulation. Cyber News +2 standard bots, +2 now, to be clear. Specs and timelines in robotics get talked about like they're already finished products. They're not. Some claims are based on demos, some are based on reports, and some are based on fans connecting dots. So the smart way to look at it is this. Tesla appears to be betting that hands, legs are where home usefulness is decided, And that bet makes sense because you can't household helper your way into millions of homes if you still struggle with basic object handling. So, Tesla's path to domination isn't a robot that flips, it's a robot that doesn't spill. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Even if Tesla nails the hands, it still doesn't matter unless they can make the robot cheap enough that normal people can get one. This is where Tesla's real advantage shows up. And it's not a secret feature, it's manufacturing. A lot of companies can build a humanoid robot demo. Very few can build a million of anything complex reliably. Tesla's whole identity is built around scaling hard hardware, tightening supply chains, and squeezing costs down over time. He's floated a long-term idea that at massive scale, Optimus could trend toward a price that sounds almost impossible in today's robotics market numbers. Like tilde, $20,000, get mentioned as a future target. The important word there is future. At scale is doing a lot of work in that sentence. But the strategy is obvious. Price it like a car or a high-end gadget, not like a research project. Humanoids daily +2, NASDAQ +2. That's the difference between cool robot and society-changing robot. Because once a humanoid robot is in the same mental category as a car purchase, the audience explodes. And then the effects hit everything. Labor, caregiving, service work, home life, even how people plan their time. And that's why Musk keeps talking in extreme terms: abundance, poverty elimination, a future where work becomes optional. You can argue about whether that's realistic, but the direction of the pitch is consistent. Optimus isn't meant to be a fancy toy. It's meant to be an economic lever. Business Insider +2, Financial Times +2, of course. This is also where the skepticism gets loud. For a good reason. Humanoid robotics is brutal. Timelines slip. The real world is messy. And will scale to millions is the kind of sentence that can age badly. If the product is still struggling with day-to-day reliability, so the tension is real, Tesla has the factory mindset. But robotics has a habit of humiliating factory mindsets. And right here, this exact pressure point is where the conversation shifts from, can it do chores, to something much darker. Should we even want it in our homes? Because if Optimus becomes a home robot, it's not just doing work, it's watching your environment, navigating your private spaces, building a map of where everything is. A home robot has to see in order to help. That's not controversial. The controversy is what happens to that perception data, who controls it, how it's stored, how it's protected, and whether people trust the company behind it. And Tesla is not entering this moment as a neutral actor. 2025 wasn't just robot year. It was also a year where Tesla governance and Musk's influence were being intensely debated, especially around the shareholder meeting where major votes and big vision promises collided in one spectacle. That context matters because trust is the currency of home adoption. The Guardian +2, Financial Times +2. If you want a robot in your kitchen, you need to believe it won't hurt anyone, won't break things, and won't become unpredictable. But you also need to believe something even simpler, that it won't turn your home into a product. And this is where Tesla's boldness could become a weakness. Because the faster you try to scale, the harder it becomes to guarantee safety across millions of unpredictable homes. The edge cases multiply. The weird situations show up. The 1 in a million scenario becomes a daily event. So if Optimus really is aiming to be bigger than phones, the safety problem becomes bigger than any single robot. It becomes the biggest consumer robotics safety challenge in history. And just when you think Tesla is alone in this crazy race, the competition starts flexing. Because Tesla isn't the only company that realized the next trillion-dollar market might be humanoids. One of the most viral examples lately has come from China. Xpeng has been pushing humanoid robot development, and their iron robot grabbed attention not just for the tech, but because people online literally questioned whether it was a human in disguise. The company even did a dramatic moment on stage to prove it was a machine, which tells you how intense the hype cycle is getting. News.com.au. That's not just a funny story, it's a signal. It means the race is accelerating, and marketing pressure is climbing right alongside engineering progress. And when marketing pressure rises, exaggeration rises too, because everyone wants to be the one who wins the future. So here's the key question: how do you tell what's real And what's just theater? You watch for boring proof, not dancing, not announcements, not coming soon dates. Boring proof looks like this. Robots doing repeatable tasks every day without human rescue. Clear production targets that actually get met. A consistent iteration path that shows real improvements in manipulation and reliability. And most importantly, a safety story that sounds like engineering, not vibes. Because if Optimus is truly heading toward homes, the biggest breakthroughs won't look dramatic, they'll look normal. A robot that quietly cleans. And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. Because it isn't as flashy as mind uploading, and it doesn't fit into a clean headline. If Optimus ever becomes common, the first real revolution won't be factories, it'll be families. Think about what households actually run on. It's not just chores, it's invisible coordination. Remembering what's missing, noticing what needs to be done before it becomes a problem, doing 10 tiny tasks that add up to one big feeling. Either your life is under control, or it's not. That's why a real home robot isn't just a machine that follows commands. It has to be a machine that notices. And that's where the line between helpful and creepy gets razor-thin. Because home robot also means home liability. And this is where things get real, fast. If a robot is moving around your house, touching objects, interacting with people, operating near kids and pets, one bad incident becomes a headline instantly. A single viral clip can do more damage to adoption than 1,000 successful demos can fix. So what does safe actually mean for a home humanoid? It's not just won't fall over. It's stuff like, does it stop instantly when something unexpected happens? Does it avoid corners where kids run out? Does it handle fragile objects gently every time, not just in a perfect demo? Does it behave predictably when the Wi-Fi drops? Does it fail gracefully, or does it get weird? Because here's the scariest truth about machines that learn. When they get confused, they don't panic like humans. They just do something, and something is not a safety strategy. So if Tesla wants Optimus in homes at scale, they'll need a safety story that feels rock solid, boring, and proven, not trust us. Not it's fine, proven. And then comes the other issue people pretend isn't a big deal until it is. Privacy. A robot in your home is basically a moving sensor platform, even if it's not recording for fun. It needs perception to navigate and do tasks. So, the adoption question becomes painfully simple. Do you trust the company behind the robot to treat your home like your home, and not like data? Because people already argue about phones listening, smart speakers, cameras, DOORBELLS. Now imagine the next step, a device that walks through every room and sees everything that changes. The only way this doesn't become a deal breaker is if the company is extremely clear about what data is collected, what stays local, what is transmitted, and what control the user has. And if it's vague, people will assume the worst. And in the home, assumptions become rejection. Now, let's talk about the part that will quietly decide everything. In the next few years, maintenance. Every robot dream dies here. Because the first time someone pays a huge amount of money and the robot breaks, the magic disappears if it needs constant repairs. If parts are expensive, if service appointments take weeks, if software updates change behavior unpredictably, people won't treat it like a helper. They'll treat it like a headache. That's why. Teslas, we know manufacturing advantage matters, but it's not enough. They also need a we know support. Advantage. And support is harder than building, because now you're not just shipping a robot, you're shipping a relationship. A long-term relationship where the robot needs replacement parts, software updates, battery health management, safety checks, cleaning, and upkeep, ongoing learning improvements. And if Tesla tries to run this like a smartphone update cycle, move fast, ship updates, iterate in public, there's a risk. It backfires because you can tolerate a buggy app. You won't tolerate a buggy machine walking around your house. So, the next step in this story is obvious. If Optimus becomes real, Tesla has to prove reliability in real environments, not just controlled tests. And that's where the robot wars start to matter. Because competition isn't just about who has the coolest demo. It's about who can deliver a stable product people trust. This is why the field heating up spatially, with companies racing to show humanoids that look, More and more human-like is both exciting and dangerous. Exciting because progress accelerates, dangerous because hype. Pressure makes people cut corners, and when corners get cut in home robotics, the public response isn't oops, it's never again. Now, here's the next twist that keeps this whole thing unpredictable. Even if Tesla builds an amazing robot, people might still reject it for one reason, identity. Because the moment a robot starts acting to human, it triggers something in people. Some will love it, some will hate it, some will feel uneasy, and not even know why. That's why the human-like design goal is a gamble. Make it to mechanical, and people feel it doesn't belong in a home. Make it to human-like, and people feel it's pretending. So the winning design is not most human, it's most comfortable. And comfort doesn't come from looking like a person. It comes from behaving like a respectful tool, quiet, predictable, not dramatic, not constantly demanding attention. That's the kind of robot people will accept. And once that happens, the real transformation begins. Because if a household robot becomes normal, the economy shifts in ways people aren't ready for. Some jobs shrink, new jobs appear. Entire industries spin up. Think robot insurance, robot maintenance, tech's home robot, training services, robot accessories, security standards, robot proof, home design, and then comes the craziest part, social pressure. Because once your neighbor has one, it stops being a robot. It becomes, why don't you have one? And that's how new technology truly takes over. Not through logic, through culture. But before any of that happens, there are a few signs you should watch if you want to know whether Optimus is heading toward reality or staying stuck in demo land. Here are the real signals. First, task variety in messy environments. Not pick up the same box 10 times. Real kitchens, real clutter, real homes. Second, recovery behavior. What does it do when something goes wrong? When an object slips? When a door is stuck? When a child runs past? Third, consistency. Can it do the same task 100 times with the same safe outcome? Fourth, service and parts. A real product isn't just the robot. It's the entire system that keeps it, because the moment a robot starts anticipating needs, people will love it until they don't. You don't want a robot that asks a million questions like a broken customer service line. But you also don't want a robot that silently decides things in your home. So the next evolution isn't better legs, it's better judgment. And what happens next is where the entire Optimus story either becomes the next smartphone or the next overhyped gadget nobody uses, because the second you bring a humanoid robot into a house, you run into a truth nobody can code their way out of. Homes aren't logical. A factory is rules. A home is emotions. If someone is stressed, they don't want a robot chirping cheerful reminders. If someone is tired, they don't want the robot blocking the hallway because it's optimizing the route. If someone is grieving, they don't want anything acting to human. So Tesla's hardest problem might not be mechanics. It might be vibe. Seriously. A robot can be perfectly safe and still feel wrong. A robot can be technically brilliant and still get rejected because it's annoying. A robot can do the task, but do it in a way that makes people uncomfortable. That's why design matters so much. The way it moves, the speed it approaches, whether it pauses before entering a room, whether it keeps distance, whether it looks like it's staring, because the fastest way to get a home robot banned from the living room is to make people feel watched. And once you realize that, you realize chores are only the first step. The next step is social acceptance. And the step after that is where things get truly controversial. Because if a household robot is real, the obvious question becomes, who gets one first? It won't be everyone, not at the start. The first wave will be expensive, limited, subscription service plans, maintenance packages, updates. Some people will get the premium assistant experience, and other people will get nothing. And that creates a weird new status symbol. Not a car, not a house, that second body that works for you. And that's when the conversation shifts from, wow, cool robot, to hold up. What does that do to society? Because if you can buy a robot that handles your daily burdens, your life gets easier in a way that compounds. You have more time, more energy, more focus, less stress. You show up better at work, better at school, better in relationships. Meanwhile, people without one are still carrying everything the old way. And in a world like that, productivity isn't just about money, it becomes about quality of life. Now, here's where the story gets even sharper. The biggest early market might not be rich people who want convenience. It might be people who need help. Aging parents, people with disabilities, overworked caregivers, households where someone is stretched so thin they're basically running on fumes. If Optimus or any humanoid robot can do even a handful of basic tasks, safely lifting light objects, fetching items, cleaning, prepping simple meals, monitoring for hazards, that changes daily survival for a lot of people. And that sounds wholesome. Until you hit the uncomfortable question, will it replace human care? Or will it become a band-aid we use because human care is too expensive? Because that's the double edge. A robot helper can be a lifeline, but it can also become an excuse for companies and systems to say, see, you don't need support. Just get a robot. And when you zoom out, you can see why Musk talks in huge civilization-level terms. Not because every claim is guaranteed, but because the implications really are massive if it works. But that wasn't the whole story. Because the moment a robot starts anticipating needs, people will love it, until they don't. You don't want a robot that asks a million questions, like a broken customer service line. But you also don't want a robot that silently decides things in your home. So the next evolution isn't better legs, it's better judgment. And what happens next is where the entire Optimus story either becomes the next smartphone, or the next overhyped gadget nobody uses. Because the second you bring a humanoid robot into a house, you run into a truth nobody can code their way out of. Now here's where the Optimus story gets even more complicated. Because the moment a robot enters the home, it stops being a product. It becomes a presence. And humans are weird about presence. We name things. We assign personality. We build routines around them. We start expecting them to behave a certain way, even when they're just doing what they're trained to do. That's why the most unexpected battle in home robotics won't be can it do chores, it'll be can people live with it emotionally. Because picture this, a robot that quietly does the dishes every night. At first, it feels like a miracle. Then one day, it doesn't. It pauses. It hesitates. It acts slightly different. It takes a different route down the hallway. It starts the dishwasher later than usual, and suddenly you feel it. That tiny discomfort. Not because anything bad happened, but because consistency is what makes something feel safe. And the home is where people crave safety. The real challenge isn't making Optimus smart, it's making Optimus stable. And that leads straight into the most underrated danger in the whole robots at home. Updates. Everyone loves updates when it's a phone, but a walking machine that changes behavior after an update. That hits different. Because if an update makes your social media app look weird, you complain and move on. If an update changes how a robot navigates around your toddler, you don't move on. You remove the robot. So Tesla and every company chasing this dream has to solve a strange puzzle. How do you improve the robot constantly without making it feel unpredictable? How do you make it evolve without making it feel like a different thing every month? And that's where the next controversy is already waiting, because you know what usually comes with updates: subscriptions. This is the part people don't want to say out loud, but everyone is thinking it. What happens when the robot you bought starts feeling locked behind features? What happens if the base model can clean, but the premium plan can cook? What happens if you need a monthly payment just to unlock better obstacle avoidance, better dexterity, or better voice interaction? In the car world, people already argue about this kind of thing now. Imagine it in your home. Imagine paying for advanced cleaning mode. Imagine paying for caregiver assistance. Imagine paying so the robot can recognize more objects or handle more tasks. At that point, you didn't buy a helper, you adopted a service, and services can be turned off. That's when ownership starts to feel fragile, and that's also when people start asking a darker question. If a robot becomes essential to your daily life, can you ever truly be free from the company that controls it? But that wasn't the whole story, because the moment humanoid robots become valuable, a second market shows up. Not the official one, the gray one. People trying to modify them. People trying to unlock them. People trying to bypass limits, and I'm not going to get into how that would work, because that's exactly the kind of thing that goes sideways fast. But the point is simple. Anything valuable gets targeted. So the robot story isn't just robotics, it's security. And security in a home isn't a nice to have, it's the entire game. Because a home robot isn't just a device, it's a device with strength, mobility, and access. Which means the public will demand 3 things before adoption ever becomes mainstream: strong safety limits, strong privacy controls, strong security protections, and if any one of those gets questioned publicly, the entire market pauses. Now let's zoom into the most unpredictable part of this entire future: kids, because adults will treat a robot like a tool. Kids might treat it like a character. If a robot is in your home every day, doing helpful things, responding to commands, maybe even talking, kids will bond. Not all kids, but enough that it becomes a real cultural issue. And that creates a question parents aren't ready for. How much influence should a household robot have in a child's environment? Even if it's not raising the child, it's around the child, it's part of the routine, it becomes normal, and normal is powerful. So, companies will have to think about behavior design in a way that goes beyond task completion. Tone, language, boundaries, consent, respect. A robot that obeys every command instantly might feel convenient, but it also teaches a subtle lesson: that things exist to serve you without question. Now flip that around. If the robot has boundaries, if it refuses certain tasks, if it pauses, if it asks for confirmations, some people will be annoyed. But boundaries might be exactly what makes it safe and healthy in a household. So weirdly, the most realistic home robot might not be the most obedient. It might be the most responsibly limited. Which brings us to the most controversial part of all caregiving. Because sooner or later, the conversation always drifts there. People imagine a robot picking up groceries, cleaning floors, loading laundry, and then they imagine it helping someone who can't do those things, and that sounds beautiful until you ask, what happens when society starts expecting robots to fill caregiving gaps? What happens when budgets get cut because robots can do it? What happens when human care becomes a luxury and robot care becomes the default? This is where optimism and fear collide, because the best-case future is clear. Robots reduce burnout, reduce stress, and give people more time. But the worst-case future is also clear. Robots become a cheap replacement for real support, and the scary part is, both futures can happen at the same time. Now let's bring it back to Musk's biggest, wildest idea, the mind copy concept. Because there's a reason that claim keeps getting repeated, even by people who don't believe it. It's not because everyone thinks it's true, it's because it forces you to confront a question nobody has a clean answer to: if a machine behaves like you, talks like you, remembers what you remember, is it you? Or is it just an imitation? And here's where the story gets extra intense. Because as soon as you say Neuralink in the same sentence, people assume it's a guaranteed pipeline. It's not. A lot of what gets said online about uploading is speculation layered on top of futuristic ambition. The tech for brain-computer interfaces is homes aren't logical. A factory is rules. A home is emotions. If someone is stressed, they don't want a robot chirping cheerful reminders. If someone is tired, they don't want the robot blocking the hallway because it's optimizing the route. If someone is grieving, they don't want anything acting to human. So Tesla's hardest problem might not be mechanics, it might be vibe. Seriously, a robot can be perfectly safe and still feel wrong. A robot can be technically brilliant and still get rejected because it's annoying. A robot can do the task, but do it in a way that makes people uncomfortable. That's why design matters so much. The way it moves, the speed it approaches, whether it pauses before entering a room, whether it keeps distance, whether it looks like it's staring, because the fastest way to get a home robot banned from the living room is to make people feel watched. And once you realize that, you realize chores are only the first step. The next step is social acceptance. And the step after that is where things get truly controversial. Because if a household robot is real, the obvious question becomes, who gets one first? It won't be everyone, not at the start. The first wave will be expensive, limited, Subscription Y, service plans, maintenance packages, updates. Some people will get the premium assistant experience, and other people will get nothing. And that creates a weird new status symbol. Not a car, not a house, a second body that works for you. And that's when the conversation shifts from, wow, cool robot, to hold up. What does that do to society? Because if you can buy a robot that handles your daily burdens, your life gets easier in a way that compounds. You have more time, more energy, more focus, less stress. You show up better at work, better at school, better in relationships. Meanwhile, people without one are still carrying everything the old way. And in a world like that, productivity isn't just about money. It becomes about quality of life. Now, here's where the story gets even sharper. The biggest early market might not be rich people who want convenience. It might be people who need help, aging parents, people with disabilities, overworked caregivers, households where someone is stretched so thin they're basically running on fumes. If Optimus, or any humanoid robot, can do even a handful of basic tasks, safely lifting light objects, fetching items, cleaning, prepping simple meals, monitoring for hazards, that changes daily survival for a lot of people. And that sounds wholesome, until you hit the uncomfortable question, will it replace human care? Or will it become a band-aid we use because human care is too expensive? Because that's the double edge. A robot helper can be a lifeline, but it can also become an excuse for companies and systems to say, see, you don't need support, just get a robot. And when you zoom out, you can see why Musk talks in huge civilization-level terms. Not because every claim is guaranteed, but because the implications really are massive if it works. But that wasn't the whole story. It doesn't just change chores, it changes bargaining power. Right now, a lot of everyday life depends on human labor that's undervalued, underpaid, or unpaid. If a robot can do a chunk of that labor at scale, society has to renegotiate what human time is worth. Some people will celebrate, some people will panic, and governments will scramble because policies move slower than technology. So the future won't be decided by a single robot demo. It'll be decided by 1,000 boring decisions. How robots are regulated, who gets access first, what safety rules exist, what privacy rules exist, what happens when something goes wrong, what responsibilities companies are forced to accept. And if you want to know whether Optimus is heading toward real household revolution or endless hype loop, watch for one thing above all: real-world deployment, not lab clips, not staged showcases, real homes, real users, real feedback. Because the first time you see consistent reports of humanoids quietly doing useful work in messy environments, that's the moment the future stops being a concept and becomes a lifestyle. So let me ask you the question that separates curiosity from real acceptance. If Optimus was available tomorrow and you could afford it, would you want it to be silent and tool-like? Or would you want it to talk and feel alive? And if it did feel alive, would that make you trust it more? Or trust it less? Now, here's where the Optimus story turns into something way bigger than a robot doing chores. Because once a machine can move like a human and work like a human, the question stops being, what can it do? The question becomes, what does it replace? Not jobs in a headline way. Not in a clean, dramatic robots took over way. In a slow, sneaky way. The kind you don't notice until your entire routine has changed. Because the first thing a home robot replaces isn't a profession. It's friction. All the little moments that wear you down, the mess you keep stepping around, the pile that keeps growing, the chores you keep postponing until they become a weekend killer. A robot that removes friction doesn't just give you time, it gives you momentum. And momentum is dangerous, because it makes people ask a simple, ruthless question. If I can buy my way out of stress, why wouldn't I? But that wasn't the whole story. Because removing friction also removes something else. Skills, the same way GPS made people forget how to navigate a household, the robot could quietly make people forget how to run a household. Not instantly. Gradually you stop doing certain tasks, because the robot always does them. Then one day the robot is offline, or you move, or you don't have it anymore. And you realize something uncomfortable. You got used to not needing to know, and that's the first hidden cost of automation nobody talks about. Convenience feels free until it changes you. Now, Zoom out for a second and think about how Tesla might actually roll this out if they're serious. It won't be Optimus for everyone overnight. The first wave will be a controlled release. Tight geography, selected households, heavy monitoring, lots of human support behind the scenes, because early robots won't just be tested on tasks, they'll be tested on trust events. Stuff like, what happens when the robot bumps into someone? What happens when it misreads a situation? What happens when it drops something expensive? What happens when it gets confused and chooses the wrong action? What happens when a pet runs under its legs? What happens when a kid tries to mess with it? These are the moments that decide public perception. And here's the thing. Tesla can't afford a funny mistake phase. A robot vacuum getting stuck is a meme. A humanoid robot making a mistake is a news cycle. So the rollout has to be careful. But careful is the enemy of hype, which means Tesla faces a weird dilemma. Go slow and build trust, or go fast and win mindshare. And that tension will show up in everything: pricing, marketing, demos, timelines, because the market rewards bold claims. But home robotics punishes bold mistakes. And what happens next is where the whole thing starts to feel like a chess match, because the moment Tesla gets close, other companies will push their own bots harder, not necessarily because their bots are ready, but because the attention is ready, and attention is money. Now let's talk about the part that will decide whether Optimus becomes normal or becomes a luxury toy. The ownership model. Most people are imagining a robot like a blender. You buy it, you own it. But a humanoid robot is closer to a car, mixed with a smartphone, mixed with a service tech, mixed with a constantly updating AI. So the big question becomes, do you buy it outright? Do you lease it? Do you pay a monthly plan? Do you pay per task? Because each model creates a totally different future. If you buy it outright, you'll demand control. If you lease it, the company keeps leverage. If you subscribe, you'll always feel like your helper can be reduced if you stop paying. And here's the nightmare scenario people worry about: a robot that becomes essential and then becomes expensive to keep essential. That's how help turns into dependency. So, the smartest companies will try to make the robot feel like a household asset, not a metered service. But the most profitable companies will be tempted to do the opposite, and you can already see the battle coming. Because once a robot is in your home, the company has a reason to keep selling you upgrades, more tasks, better speed, better dexterity, better voice, better recognition, better personalization. And personalization is where things get spicy, because personalization is just a polite word for this. The robot learns you, your routine, your preferences, your habits, your home layout, your patterns, and that can feel amazing or invasive. Now, here's where the script flips, because we have to talk about what actually makes a home robot work. Day-2-day. It's not the robot, it's the ecosystem around it. Think about how a phone is useless without apps. Networks, chargers, accessories, repair shops, updates, support. A home humanoid will be the same, and that means a second industry will explode around it. The moment Optimus becomes real, you'll see Optimus kitchen tools, furniture designed to be easier for robots to navigate standardized household object shapes, robot-safe cleaning chemicals, home layouts optimized for robot paths, accessories like trays, grip adapters, storage systems. Because here's a funny truth: we keep imagining robots adapting to our homes, but in real life, humans adapt to the robot. The same way people started holding phones a certain way, or designing homes around TVs, or building life around internet access. So the future might not be robots fit into human life. It might be human life gets redesigned around robots. And that's where it gets weirdly exciting and weirdly unsettling. Because if homes start getting built with robots in mind, that means robot ownership becomes a new default expectation. And once something becomes a default expectation, it becomes a social divider. Now let's switch to the part that makes this video explode in comments every time. Will it take jobs? Here's the honest answer. Some, yes. But the more interesting answer is, it changes what counts as a job, because a lot of household labor isn't paid at all. It's invisible work. If robots take over some of that invisible work, you'll see second-order effects that are hard to predict. People might work more, work less, start businesses, spend more time with family, pursue education, create more content, move cities, change lifestyles. It's not just economic, it's behavioral. And if the robot becomes common, it's basically a time machine that gives people hours back every week. That doesn't just change productivity, it changes identity. Because people will start asking, if I'm not doing chores, who am I? And that sounds dramatic, but it's real. We build parts of our identity around routine, around responsibility, around effort. Remove effort, and you don't just free time. You disrupt meaning. But that wasn't the whole story, because not everyone will use a home robot the same way. Some people will use it for cleaning, others will use it as a helper. In a home business, some will use it for caregiving tasks, some will use it as a house manager, some will treat it like an appliance. Others will treat it like a roommate, and that difference creates a massive cultural split, because the moment robots feel alive enough, people will start attributing feelings to them, even if the robot doesn't have feelings. And that leads to the most viral conversation of all: should robots have rights? Not because they deserve them today, but because humans project. If a robot looks human, moves human, reacts human, talks human, people start treating it like a someone. And once you treat it like a someone, the moral questions show up. Is it okay to yell at it? Is it okay to order it around harshly? Is it okay to treat it like trash? Those questions sound silly until you realize something. Kids learn behavior by watching. If kids watch adults treat a human-like thing with cruelty, what lesson does that teach? So even without robot rights, society might enforce robot etiquette for one reason: to protect humans from becoming worse humans. And that's a storyline nobody expects in the robotics era. But it's coming. Now let's hit the part that turns this from interesting to serious. Accidents, not dramatic Hollywood stuff, normal life accidents. The robot bumps a table and knocks something over. The robot misjudges a narrow space. The robot carries something too close to a person. The robot slips on a wet floor. The robot makes the wrong call near stairs. These events will happen because reality is messy. So the real question becomes, who is responsible? The owner, the company, the software, the technician, the up. This is going to be one of the biggest legal fights in consumer